A spring convention about Scotland's future to unite people from across society with regular discussion and open debate, free from party politics, on matters of crucial importance to the nation, focusing clearly on Scotland's future and the achievement of meaningful self-determination.
Robin has got the answer to how can the people influence risk-averse politicians.
Let me tell you where I'm coming from this, and I'm going to do this in two parts. Part one is where we are, part two is where we could be. So what could we do? Right, so let me explain where I'm coming from. Often I have to specify when I'm doing talks like this. Yes, I'm a lefty, yes, I'm a left-wing think tank, but that wasn't my career. I was a political lobbyist. And political lobbyists have a set of fairly standard approaches that they use when they are trying to get politicians to do things. Now, the first thing that I always encourage anybody to remember is that politicians are just people. That's the first thing you've got to remember. I always laugh when people say the politicians are so lazy. Plumbers or admin staff, the world is full of people who do about as much work as they have to. Right? So that's just start from that basis. The second thing that I always encourage people to do when you're thinking about lobbying is begin with the start to think about what your target is going to. So one of the things I try to explain to people is you're not the only person asking a politician for whatever you're asking any given day. So think of yourself as being in a queue of people who are asking the same stuff. So there's a whole bunch of things that you can do when you're standardly doing lobbying. But the fundamental lesson I learned early on is that in any given circumstance, a politician will pursue whichever course of action is likely to cause the least pain negative to take. So that's simple. It's just human nature, particularly when you get up to senior politics. I do keep trying to explain to people outside politics imagine it's like chess, sitting back thinking 3 moves ahead. It's not, it's 5-ball tennis. They exist in a daily cycle where what they are trying to do is get the maximum number of balls back over the net as they can before tea time. And if you think about it in that way, how you approach trying to influence people and what you're doing makes more sense. Don't waste your time. Make the thing that you want them to do the easiest option, and you can do that via sticks, or you can do it via carrots. So you can make inaction painful, or you can make action attractive, or you can just make it incredibly easy, and why wouldn't you just do this? So, let me talk about that. I mean, there's a lot more to say about it. The world of lobbying, you know all the tricks. Have an impact assessment, that's just fiction that economic consultants put together, and you tell them a number, they'll come up with a number, they'll come up with a methodology to give you a number. Politicians don't pay attention to economic impact assessments if they want to. So if they don't want to do the thing that you're saying, they will tell you that the economic impact assessment doesn't carry weight. If they want to do the thing that they are telling you, that they will waive the economic impact assessment into the public. It will be the same methodology. So for example, they will all use multipliers of 1.7, 1.8 for secondary expenditure, blah, blah, blah. So it's not really the case that you are rationally changing the minds of the politicians with a lot of stuff. You are providing them material to enable them to make the decision that they would probably be inclined to make given the conditions that you've set. So, I mean, there's absolutely loads of this. I could go on about the basic approaches of lobbying and campaigning for hours, because it's been my career for the longest time. But let me tell you about the context of Scotland, because I think that's really what we're talking about. So let me run through what we tried to do. Now, you won't remember this, but it was a period where I was quiet, peaceful, not making trouble, and largely smiling and positively reinforcing the Scottish Government. You won't remember that because I was largely smiling and positively reinforcing the Scottish Government, and nobody ever notices that. This is phase one. So this is what we did at first. So with Commonweal, when we came in, my assumption had been that what we were talking about Commonweal as a think tank, a appeared to sit very absolutely adjacent to what the Scottish Government, what the Nicola Sturgeon administration said she wanted to do. So we worked on what we would normally do in such a circumstance, which is we smiled and said, let us help you with some good ideas to achieve the outcomes that you want. It was about, I'll just be absolutely honest, just tell you all the true stories. It was about 6 months in when I realised this wasn't going to work. I realised it wasn't going to work because I'd been doing some analysis of how decisions were getting made in the Scottish Government. And it was remarkably capricious, is the truth. It was a very small group of people, and their mode of decision making had largely become, we're seeking authority to be a dominant, powerful government. We want the support of others who signal our authority, and you're not it. That wasn't the words were much ruder, but we got feedback directly from a government advisor that commonly wouldn't be at the table because we weren't the kind of story they were trying to tell. However, we can't give up, we've got to keep going. So what we did was we continued to try the standard approach. The standard approach is offer them solutions to problems they're seeing. We kept doing this. We kept doing it on a rational basis and it didn't work. So, what I did next was the next thing that I would do, which is you've got to work out with a politician or anybody you're trying to influence, if the route, the path that you're trying to travel is not seen as them as minimising their pain or maximising their benefit, you need to look for where the pressure points are. Now those you've moved out the positivity phase at this stage. Now it doesn't mean you don't present it positively, but the reality is that a positive let me help approach has not worked. Now you're moving into we now need to place some pressure on you. But, and again, those of you know my personality may be surprised, but the first thing I'm saying is never, ever, ever overplay your hand early. Right? So a lot of amateur campaigners or lobbyists go in and ask nice and then switch right up to full battle mode, put out the press releases. This doesn't generally work. If you're already in a situation where they're not sympathetic to you, fast escalation is not always the best idea. You need to know what you're doing. So what we then did was develop a slightly different approach. And what we decided was with the Sturgeon administration there was an approach that worked. And that approach was consent from above, pressure from below. So we couldn't get in directly. We couldn't talk directly, and even if we could, we didn't listen. So what we discovered was that if the Sturgeon administration in particular was given permission from above, permission from people that they thought were authority figures to do something, and that was then safe, and then they had a sufficient body of pressure from below to say, right, there's a motivation to do this. So these are primary decision-making theory things, which is people need a reason to make a decision, so there's got to be some pressure on them to make a decision, or they've got to want to make a decision, and they have to believe that the decision is not going to backfire on them, which is therefore they come off. So we really ran this first with the Scottish National Investment Bank. It was actually Laurie who helped us. He had links with Marianne Mazziccato, who was the Council of Economic Advisors. I spoke to Gary Gillespie, who was the Chief Economist. The Scottish Government was sympathetic to the idea, and he thought it was quite a good idea. So they got it onto the agenda for the Council of Economic Advisors. We prepared a slide set for them on the case for the Scottish National Investment Bank, and the Council of Economic Advisors said, that makes sense, we think this is quite a good idea. Meanwhile, we were working with Friends of the Earth and others to build a large-scale campaign inside the SNP, particularly at a party conference, to get a membership vote in favour of the Scottish National Investment Bank. We did that comfortably, it was unanimously passed. So we now have this party policy, and we have the Council of Economic Advisors supporting it. So what happened? That was a big one. The problems are multiple at this stage. I'm going to talk you through this for a little while to explain why it's got difficult. The problems are It's one of these. It's like exactly what Keir Starmer's doing with GB Energy. It's an idea and a name. It wasn't doing the thing that the name suggested it does. And this is part of the difficulty. Is if you've got an administration or you've got a government which is kind of pushed into doing things but it does it half-heartedly, you can lose control of it. It's very, very difficult after primary legislation is passed to have much leverage. You try and get a story in the newspapers. Campaigners are unhappy about Section 3 of additional regulations next to statutory instruments passed in committee. You don't get that kind of leverage. Now, we repeated this a number of times. We repeated this and successfully got a bunch of statisticians and others to say that Scotland's statistics and data is a terrible mess. We should have a national statistics agency. Again, we ran a campaign, we got a whole bunch of SNP branches to pass that. The SNP conference voted unanimously for a Scottish National Data Authority, a statistics agency, and it was ignored. We did the same for the National Infrastructure Agency, which was a PFI replacement. Again, we got a bunch of senior people in architecture and others to say PFI is not working, we should do something about this, and we got an SNP conference to pass a motion on a Scottish National Infrastructure Agency. They were then compelled to put it into government, and it went through the nonsensical meat churner of Scottish government politics, which is when it's working groups, out of working groups, through secondary reviews, up the ladder, whatever the bloody hell else it was, and then disappeared. So it never happened. The long and short is we took this approach 6 times, achieved it every single time, only one of the 6 actually came out as action. So this is the second thing I'm trying to say, is if you are trying to achieve specific policy outcomes, it's very difficult when you're doing a lot of them, and it's very difficult when you don't get those who implementing it actually on board with the concepts and ideas that you're trying to get done. Now, by this point, the pattern is set in. And it's not just us. I'm looking around and I know a number of you have been involved in other forms of lobbying. This is literally everybody everywhere just now. The people who are like me but still doing that career and haven't moved into full-time job causing trouble, they can't say this sort of stuff in public because you can't as a lobbyist start saying the Scottish government's bad. I'm working with them all the time. This is the only conversation that anybody has. My good God, this is rubbish, how do we get anything done? Land reform bill is daft. I mean, it's daft. It says that you can, this was another example. The SNP conferences, the SNP fringe meeting that we run at every SNP fringe conference as the Revive, which is the Coalition for Land Reform, is without by miles the biggest fringe meeting of every SNP conference. But it's absolutely packed. There's a massive support for land reform inside the SNP, so the Scottish Government keeps doing something, but in a way that won't affect the landowners. So, for example, the current legislation says that any land sale of 3,000 hectares and above can be pulled in by the Scottish Government to assess it to the public interest. Except for Craig has looked, and we can't find an occasion ever when 3,000 hectares went on the market in one lot, and we did ask the civil servants, what happens if we break it into 2 lots of 1,500? And the civil servants basically said, oh, those wily landowners, how do you stop them? Yeah, giant screaming loopholes in what is already weak legislation. Right, so what I'm trying to tell you is, if you are doing this at the detail level and you are lobbying inside a government, it is an extensive and irritating courtly dance that looks like it should be from Louis XIV or something. Right? You do all these things, you don't usually see this stuff. You kind of saw it with Starmer and Trump. Right? So that was actually on camera. So it's a bit of ingratiating, trying to work out when to put a bit of pressure on, trying to sneak in your asks. All this stupid dance happens all the time, every day, everywhere. That's what happens. Why do we never get much change? For the reasons I've just explained. The dance is inherently stupid. There is no government anywhere in Europe, which is that Europe and the US is dominant in this model. There's no government in Europe anywhere that's doing anything of any interest. And this model of how people are governing just now is almost designed to replicate whatever they did last. So you just keep doing the same thing over and over again, because of all these incentives that are built all the way through it. How do you break out of this? The correct answer is, you have no idea how easy it is. You just need a politician that wants to do things. Right? So the flip side of this is, that same process can get things done quickly and effectively when people in politics want to do it. I mean, they can't find money for everything until it's defensive. Suddenly it's not a problem. Right? People in politics can do things if they want to do them. Civil servants can be made to deliver. Agencies are like it's like porridge. It's like wading through porridge. The agency sector, they slow everything down on every occasion, but you can bypass them, you can go through them, you can incentivise them, you can abolish them. Right? So a politician, a senior politician who wants to do things, can do things quickly. There is always resistance, there is always pushback, but the truth is, you've got the power, and that's the reality. So, what you need is politicians who want to do things, or who are compelled to do things. Now, again, we are now looking at we're not looking to change government policy here particularly. We're looking to change the perspectives of the case for independence. And thank goodness, because I'm sorry to be unkind about ourselves, but our case in 2014 was necessarily half-baked. I keep saying I'm not critical about this. Nobody really expected we were going to get a referendum in 2011. 2011, the big mistake, I spoke to Alex before his death, I said, Alex, the big mistake is you lot should have set up a proper think tank in the 1990s, when there was space and time to start to build the case for Scottish independence. And for those who are just out of interest, my mother was, mum and dad were both very senior in the SNP in the 70s and 80s, and I bought at the house a full set of the papers that the SNP produced in the 1980s, covering policy for every single area after independence. Right? Now I've got those photostated in a pack of, I think there's 36 substantive policy papers. And I kid you not, if you took those and made the SNP policy just now, it would be a giant step forward. Right? So returning to the level of policy making the SNP was engaged in the 1980s would jump things forward enormously. But that has all been closed down. So that's why this is really difficult. Okay, now here's the thing. When I say politicians have power, they derive power from somewhere. That's the reality. Politicians do not carry power. They don't have Musk power, which is just money. They don't have Pope power, which is just history. They have delegated power. So they've got two sources of that power. One is how they are selected and supported from inside, and one is how they are elected and supported from outside. Now, believe me, trying to change politicians through the public is possible. It's just incredibly expensive. I mean, literally, it's really expensive. You cannot in the living room, you never could. Broadcast to a mass citizenship for long enough to get them interested enough to get them to place pressure on the politicians, unless you have an enormous amount of committed energy and effort and time, or if you have money. But if you've got money, you can do it. And this is how the big public PR campaigns take place. It's how the oil industry is lobbying against net zero just now. We can't do that either. So it's not the public delegated authority, it's the internal delegated authority. So let's be realistic. We're talking here about the Greens and the SNP. We're talking about the Greens and the SNP's political parties to up their game with their perspectives for what independence means. Dear God, not least in terms of international relations, foreign policy, defence, and this global shit show in which we are currently existing. Literally nobody with the head thinks that our existing position is fit for purpose, given what's happening just now. A serious movement, a serious part, a serious organisation will be working on that right now, and we're not working on anything. So, we were half-baked in 2014 My annoyance, my anger is what's happened since. Knowing that we were half-baked, we should have been getting our act together and preparing for whatever the next opportunity came. I have no patience for retrospective preparation. It's shoddy, amateur hour, and it doesn't work. If you know you want to paint your walls, you seal the plasterboard first. That's it. You do things properly, and we don't do things properly. From my professional perspective, it drives me up the wall. I mean, I'm just looking at them saying, they flounder, politicians flounder, talking about independence in television. I said, of course you do, you've not done the work. Anybody looks like an idiot in television if they've not done the work. So, how can you go about this? Well, to go about this just now, the simple reality is that I can see no leverage other than 3 ways. There are 3 things that we can broadly do. One of them I doubt. So, the 3 models that you would use from where we are now to get this. Model 1 would be, I'm afraid to call it Reading Daycare, or the village elders. Right? You would have a bunch of people that would tap John Swinney, Patrick Garvin, and Lorna Slater on the shoulder and says, you're losing the room, you're going to face rebellion, you need to start taking seriously the process of re-engaging right across the independence movement to refresh the perspectives and get us in a fighting state for what comes next. And I don't know who they are. For about 7 years now, I've been trying to work out who are the village elders in the SNP. And some ended up in Alba, and some have just kind of retired, others have been isolated or out of fashion or whatever. I struggle to find a group of elder statesmen who would come forward and say, you need to start taking this seriously. The second option is that the parties themselves, the membership of the parties, would need to exert that pressure themselves. Now, they would not only need to exert it, they would need to be committed to following it through. Because we know what tends to happen in the SNP is resolutions are passed, much good talk happens, and then extensively prolonged procedures are designed. I'm going to say, I think specifically so that everybody loses momentum on the way through and ends up exactly where it was at the other side. That's what happened with democracy reforms. That's what happened with the post-growth commission stuff. It's a bit of a problem. So you would either need an activated membership who's actually committed to changing this over the long term, and more importantly, actively and intentionally keeping them to their word and speeding it up. I want to see yes, and I want to see, I'm not like more strategist. I want to see the SNP is so barely functioning at the moment that half the country, you could get 10 folk together and take the branches over. I keep telling people, I'm pissed off with what's going on as much as the next person, but the more the people walk out, the more vulnerable they become. Get back in the bloody party if this is what we want to do, and do this. Set up a group. Set up a gang your act together group. Make it the only reason you return to the party. But, and this is the one, you can't do this nice at this phase. You tried and tried to just say, can we have this policy? And they either said no, or they said yes and then didn't do it. You have got to be serious. I can talk more about that. So, for example, when you pass the motion, specify who's running it, specify who's on the committee, specify its delivery. Stop random motions. Just stop random shit anyway. I can't tell you this enough. As a political lobbyist, the first thing I say to the amateurs every time is, no, you'll get what you ask for. If you ask vague, you'll get vague. If you're lucky, you'll get what you ask for. If you ask vague, you get vague. I spent my whole life saying to the British left, they always say to me, we need to repeal that anti-trade union legislation. And I was saying, great, let's do that. Which act? Which sections? Are we deleting or are we amending? And they say, oh no, just like all of it. I say, that's why you lose. You can't just delete all of it. You need names, you need pages, you need pieces of strategy for removing what doesn't work, you need wording to replace it. I promise you, that's what the commercial lobbyists do. So a commercial lobbyist goes in and says, this is what we want. Section 3 amend 4 to this, Section 7 amend 7 to this, take that out, we're good. Right? We win. And we go, make it better. And they say, okay. And then we say, we made it better. Make it didn't. Right? So be specific. If you're using that route, you have to build the thing you think will work. Not ask somebody who has failed to build it in the past to build it this way. That's the second option. The third option is external pressure. Okay, this is okay, I'll just finish this last one I was going to say. I'd like to talk about how we make sure I remember this time to say, after independence, or whenever we want to get some constitutional reform in this country, we can change all this, but I'm going to run out of time. Another thing. So, the third option is unified external pressure. Now, this is the one which I think is probably at the moment our best bet. So it needs to be universal external pressure. So if you are standing for a cause and everybody in your cause starts the kind of equivalent of a slow hand clap, you start to get into difficulties, right, as a politician. You cannot move entire constituencies, but it has to be united. Now, there's a few of us in different ways working on a united movement of some description. Now, the options are multiple here, so if you've got a genuinely all-inclusive entity which was capable of developing this sort of work, and it produced an outcome and then said, you need to develop this, so that would work. Or you could just say, we want you to set up a cross-party, cross-movement, so the same thing. But once again, you have to mean it, you have to pursue it, you have to have authority, so that's why unity. It needs to be unified. If they can point to somebody else who doesn't want to do it, they'll just use that to split the groups. It needs to be a unified call from everyone that we want to do this thing, and that makes it possible. So, what do I think our best bet to get any of this to happen are? Twofold. Those of you in the SNP, go out, recruit. Those of you not in the SNP, get back in. And also stream. I talk to you all the time. I know why some of you have left. I know it's more time. I know that even inside you can sometimes find it difficult to do things. You can do less outside than you can do inside. That's the reality. And at the same time, in parallel, we should be getting our damn acts together. We should be creating some sort of single, coherent, competent structure which can represent the cause of independence. We're going to have to get over our bedroom messiah statuses. I know what I want from independence, I'm not going to get it all. Right? So we need to start getting the shit out of our heads that it's an all or nothing victory for our stupid cause, our stupid idea. It's not. We're feeding it in. It's a nation. We're going to have to negotiate, we're going to have to discuss it. We need to start doing this. We've got to drop this, we've got to get together, and we've got to find the kinds of areas that we can compromise, and this is great. That's the options that I can see. Unless someone comes up with $1 million quid, $5 million quid, I should have mentioned money Irish. That's unless we come up with that, we've got to join and change them, or unite and change them. And if we don't do these things, we'll be back at this again. This is, I don't know, 30, 40, but these have been over the last 14 years. We'll be back at the next one, and we'll just do it again. So, great to have content, but it's time to get our heads together, which is fragmented people don't win. Fragmented people don't win. End of story. Doesn't matter if it's a bit of a pitch, doesn't matter if it's a solo. Fragmented people don't win. We've got to get it.